The first time I caught Linda Vale floating in my pool, she had one of my patio towels wrapped around her shoulders and a glass of rose balanced on her stomach like she was checking into a resort. The second time, she brought 4 friends, a Bluetooth speaker, 2 bags of chips, and the kind of confidence that only comes from somebody who has spent years getting away with things nobody wanted to argue about. By the third time, I stopped asking myself why she thought she could do it, and started asking myself how long I was willing to let her treat my home like it belonged to her. My name is Daniel Mercer, and back then my wife Claire and I lived in a quiet neighborhood outside Cedar Ridge, Oklahoma, the kind of place where people waved from pickup trucks, kids left bikes in the driveway, and everybody knew who had painted their garage the wrong shade of beige. We bought that house after nearly 18 years of saving, cutting corners, taking extra jobs whenever they came along. I worked commercial maintenance, mostly HVAC and repairs, the kind of work that leaves your hands cracked in winter and smelling like metal no matter how hard you scrub. Claire worked at the county library, and between the two of us we had built a decent life, nothing fancy, just ours. The pool was the one thing that made the place feel special. It was not huge, not one of those fancy infinity pools you see behind million-dollar homes, but on a hot July afternoon, with the water shining blue and my daughter Molly jumping in like she was training for the Olympics, it felt like we had made it. I cleaned it myself, checked the filter, balanced the water, skimmed leaves every morning before work. It was peaceful, or at least it was supposed to be. Then there was Linda. Linda lived 2 houses down, but somehow she had the power to make you feel like she was standing in your living room, even when she was just walking past your mailbox. She had been on the neighborhood association board years before, and even after she got removed for what the board called repeated conduct issues, she still carried around a clipboard like it was a badge and a weapon at the same time. She had opinions about trash cans, lawn edges, porch lights, dog leashes, kids playing basketball after sunset, and apparently my pool. At first it was little things. I would come home and find wet footprints on the deck, a plastic cup under one of the chairs, a towel that did not belong to us hanging over the fence. Claire noticed it too, but I kept telling her maybe the wind had carried something over from another yard, which was a ridiculous thing to say because wind does not carry wine glasses and half-eaten nachos across a neighborhood. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I came home early because a job got cancelled, and I saw Linda through the kitchen window. She was in the shallow end, wearing a bright coral swimsuit and oversized sunglasses, laughing with another woman I had never met. My pool gate was unlatched. My deck chairs were occupied, and on the little table beside them sat a bottle of wine I knew for a fact had not been there when I left that morning. I walked outside and said, "Linda, this is private property. You need to leave." She looked at me like I had interrupted her favorite television show. Then she smiled and said, "Daniel, do not be so dramatic. We are neighbors. Neighbors share." I looked at the open gate, the wine bottle, the wet footprints across my deck, and I said, "Neighbors borrow sugar. They do not climb fences and throw pool parties." Her smile tightened for just a second, but then she laughed, waved one hand through the water, and said, "You really need to loosen up." That was the moment I understood something about Linda Vale. She did not think she was breaking a rule. She thought rules were things other people had to follow, especially people she had decided were too polite to fight back, and for a while, she was right about me. The funny thing is, once you realize somebody has mistaken your patience for weakness, you start seeing every little thing differently. The wet towels were no longer an accident. The empty cups were not careless. The music, the laughter, the way Linda always seemed to look toward my house. Before she stepped into the water, it was all a performance. She wanted me to see it. She wanted me to know she could take something that mattered to me and make me feel small in my own backyard. Claire saw it before I did. One night, after I came home to find a half-deflated flamingo float drifting in the deep end and somebody else's flip-flops under our deck chair, she stood at the kitchen sink with her arms folded and said, "Danny, you keep acting like this is about a pool. It is not. She is testing whether you will let her walk through every boundary you have." That one landed hard, because she was right. I had spent most of my adult life avoiding pointless fights. In my line of work, you learn that there is always some guy who thinks yelling makes him right, some customer who wants a discount after you have already fixed the problem, some manager who tries to hand you a mess and call it teamwork. I had learned to keep my head down, do the job, go home. But this was home, and every time Linda opened that gate, I felt something in me tighten. So I gave her one final warning. I caught her on a Thursday evening as she was checking the height of somebody's grass across the street, clipboard in hand, sunglasses pushed up on her hair. I walked over and said, "Linda, I need you to hear me clearly. You are not allowed in my yard. You are not allowed in my pool. If you come back, I will treat it as trespassing." She slowly lowered the clipboard and gave me that little smile of hers, the one that always looked less friendly the longer you stared at it. "Daniel," she said, "nobody is trying to hurt you. People are just trying to enjoy the neighborhood." I said, "Then they can enjoy their own neighborhood from their own yard." For a moment, her face changed. Not much, just enough for me to see the anger underneath all that fake sweetness. Then she leaned closer and said, "You know, people do not like selfish neighbors." I almost laughed because that was her favorite word, selfish. She used it every time somebody refused to give her what she wanted. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Good thing I am not running for mayor." After that, I stopped giving her opportunities to twist my words. I replaced the latch on the side gate, put up a clear private property sign, and installed 2 outdoor cameras that covered the gate, the deck, and most of the pool area. I also started keeping a notebook on the counter. Nothing dramatic, just dates, times, what I found, what was missing, what had been left behind. Claire thought I was going a little overboard until the next Saturday afternoon. We had taken Molly to her cousin's birthday party across town, and when we got home around 5, I checked the camera app before we even unpacked the car. There was Linda walking straight through the side gate with 2 women and a guy carrying a cooler. She had not forced the lock, but she had clearly figured out that the landscaper had left the gate unlatched earlier that day. She looked right at the camera for half a second, then kept walking. That was the part that got me. She knew she was being recorded. She just did not care. Within 10 minutes, they had their towels spread out, music playing, drinks on my table, and Linda floating in the middle of the pool like she had just won a war. One of the women asked her if I was okay with it, and Linda waved her hand and said, "Oh, Daniel always complains, but he never does anything." I watched that clip 3 times, not because it was funny, even though the look on her face was almost cartoonish, but because I finally understood the whole thing. Linda was not just using my pool, she was using me as proof that she still had power. She had lost her place on the association board. People had started ignoring her little rules, and she needed some place to feel important again. My yard had become her stage. I showed the video to Claire. She watched without saying anything. Then she looked at me and said, "You have what you need now. Do not make this ugly. Make it clear." That became the plan. No shouting, no traps, no late-night revenge nonsense, just clear evidence and a door she could not talk her way through. The following week, I called the neighborhood association office and asked for the next open meeting date. I did not accuse anyone. I did not send angry emails. I simply told the board president, a decent guy named Harold Bennett, that I had a private property issue involving repeated unauthorized access, and I wanted to address it properly. Harold sounded tired before I even finished explaining. He said, "Is this about Linda Vale?" I paused for a second and said, "I did not say that." He let out a long breath and replied, "You did not have to." Apparently, I was not the first person she had been bothering. There had been complaints about her entering backyards to inspect fences, taking pictures of cars parked too long in driveways, even knocking on doors to tell people their porch decorations were against community standards. Nothing big enough on its own, but together it painted a picture. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and I spent the days leading up to it feeling calmer than I had in months. Linda, on the other hand, must have sensed something. She started walking past our house more often, slower than usual, glancing toward the gate. Once, she stopped when I was watering the front lawn and said, "You seem quiet lately. That is usually a bad sign." I smiled and said, "Maybe I am finally learning from the best." Her eyes narrowed, but she did not answer. Then came the night that pushed everything over the edge. It was a Monday, just after 9. Claire and Molly were watching a movie in the living room, and I was in the garage trying to fix the handle on my old tool chest when I heard bass thumping from the backyard. Not loud enough for the whole neighborhood, but loud enough that I knew exactly what it was. I walked through the house, looked out the back window, and saw string lights hanging from my fence. My fence! There were people in the pool. People on my deck, somebody grilling burgers on a portable propane grill beside the shed. Linda stood near the water in a white cover-up, holding a drink and laughing like she had invited everybody over herself. For a second, I just stood there. I could feel my heartbeat in my neck, and I wanted to storm outside and start yelling until every window on the block lit up. Then Claire touched my arm and said, "Do not give her the scene she wants." So I did something that surprised even me. I picked up my phone, started recording, and walked outside calmly. The music lowered when they saw me. Linda turned around, still smiling, and said, "Oh good, you are home. We were just keeping the place lively." I looked at the grill, the lights, the empty bottles on my deck, and then at her. "Linda," I said, "you have 2 minutes to leave my property." She laughed. "You are not going to call the police over a little party." I said, "No. I am going to let you decide whether this ends with you walking out on your own or explaining all of this to an officer in front of your friends." That smile disappeared. For the first time since this started, Linda looked unsure. And that was when I knew the real fight was finally about to begin. Linda looked unsure, but only for a second. Then she did what people like Linda always do when they realize the rumors shifted against them. She got louder. She pointed at me and said, "You are threatening your neighbors now? Is that what this is? You think because you own a pool, you get to act like some kind of king?" A few of her friends looked uncomfortable, especially the guy standing beside the grill with a paper plate in his hand. Nobody wanted to meet my eyes. I kept my voice low and said, "Linda, I gave you warnings. I put up signs. I locked the gate. You came into my yard anyway, brought people into my yard anyway, and now you are standing beside my shed with a grill you did not ask to use. This is not a misunderstanding. This is trespassing." That word landed differently than anything else I had said. Trespassing. It was not dramatic. There was not a neighborhood disagreement. It was what it was. One of the women grabbed her towel and quietly started gathering her things. Then another did the same. The guy with the grill shut off the propane, folded the legs, and headed for the gate without saying a word. Linda watched them leave, her face getting tighter and redder by the second. Finally, she leaned toward me and said, "You are making a huge mistake." I said, "No, Linda. I made the mistake months ago when I thought being polite would make you stop." The next day, she tried to get ahead of the story. By noon, she had posted in the neighborhood Facebook group about unsafe pool conditions and irresponsible homeowners. She did not mention my name, but she did not have to. Everybody knew exactly who she meant. She wrote about how certain residents were creating hostile environments, how community spirit was dying, how she had been publicly humiliated for trying to enjoy an evening with friends. I read the post twice, then I closed the app and went back to work. I did not argue online. I did not reply. I saved screenshots, added them to the folder on my laptop, and waited for Tuesday night. The association meeting was held in the little community room near the pond, the same place where they planned bake sales, argued about holiday decorations, and pretended the coffee was drinkable. Claire came with me, not because I needed backup, but because she knew how much this had been weighing on me. Harold sat at the front table with 2 other board members, looking like a man who had already had a long week before the meeting even started. Linda was in the second row wearing a navy blazer, her clipboard on her lap, like she was about to take over the room. They got through lawn reminders, parking rules, and a complaint about barking dogs. Then Harold opened the floor for community concerns. Linda stood up immediately. She said there had been a serious safety issue involving a pool in the neighborhood, and that residents had been exposed to unsafe conditions after being invited onto private property. The word "invited" almost made me laugh. She said the association needed to investigate because children could be at risk and homeowners could not be allowed to act without accountability. A few people nodded at first, mostly because Linda spoke with that same confident tone she always used. Then Harold looked at me and said, "Daniel, would you like to respond?" I stood up slowly, plugged my laptop into the projector, and said I would. The room got quiet. I played the first clip, Linda entering through my gate with her friends. Then another, her standing in my pool while telling someone I always complained but never did anything. Then the video from Monday night, the grill, the lights, the drinks, her telling me I was being dramatic while standing in my backyard without permission. Nobody said a word for a few seconds, and someone in the back whispered, "Well, that answers that." Linda tried to speak, but Harold raised his hand. He said, "Linda, did Daniel invite you onto his property?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked around the room, searching for somebody to rescue her. But nobody moved. Finally, she said, "We are neighbors." Harold nodded and said, "That does not answer the question." After another long pause, she muttered, "No." Harold sighed, looked down at the printed policy in front of him, and said the board would be issuing a formal trespassing notice, a fine for repeated violations, and a 6-month suspension from association events. Linda stared at him like he had betrayed her. Then she looked at me with a kind of anger I had never seen before, grabbed her clipboard, and walked out of that room without saying another word. Outside, the air was warm and still. Claire slipped her hand into mine, and for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders drop. A couple of neighbors came over and thanked me, not because they cared about my pool, but because Linda had been making everyone miserable for years, and nobody had wanted to be the first person to push back. That Saturday, Molly was in the water, Claire was reading under the umbrella, and I was skimming a few leaves from the deep end when I noticed something strange. Linda's house was quiet. No clipboard, no loud voice, no shadow moving from driveway to driveway looking for something to complain about. Maybe she finally learned a lesson. Maybe she was just waiting for another chance to strike back. I honestly do not know. But I do know this: standing up for yourself does not always make you popular, and it does not always make the problem disappear overnight. Sometimes it just means you stop teaching people that they can walk over you. So tell me, was I right to take it to the HOA, or should I have handled Linda differently from the beginning? Drop your opinion in the comments, because I have a feeling this one is going to divide people. And if you have ever had a neighbor who treated your boundaries like a suggestion, share your story too, because trust me, I know I am not the only one.